I uncovered every secret from the last 30 years.
And I have given all the proofs of who is involved with Diddy. I have presented the videotape of Diddy's parties as evidence. Now no one can save Diddy and the other celebs. Jay-Z, after watching the rest of the documentary, you'll understand everything.
I am the fucking hardest hustler in the world. This is Savage Part 2. Don't tell me about shit. It's 2022 and I'm still a savage. Whatever I want, I get. Whatever I want, I fucking get.
They say silence is strategic, until it isn't. Because when 50 Cent finally decides to talk, the internet doesn't lean in politely, it braces for impact. And according to online chatter, his documentary didn't just talk. It allegedly pulled threads. The kind you're not supposed to tug unless you're ready for everything to unravel. Within hours, timelines lit up with whispers that certain stories long rumored, carefully dodged and conveniently buried were suddenly back in daylight, names everyone recognizes. Rooms everyone's heard about, moments people swore were off limits. This wasn't a nostalgia tour. It felt like a pressure test, because when the narrative turns toward Diddy and Jay-Z, the reaction isn't curiosity, it's panic wrapped in denial. Screenshots flew. Clips got paused and replayed. Think pieces appeared like they'd been drafted months ago, just waiting for the right spark. Was anything actually exposed? Or did the documentary do something more dangerous, connect dots people were already pretending not to see? Strap in, because once this silence breaks, the echo doesn't fade quietly. It demands answers. For years, silence sat like a velvet rope around certain conversations in hip-hop. Everyone knew where not to look. Everyone knew which rooms not to describe. And everyone pretended that quiet meant nothing happened. Then, according to online chatter, 50 Cent finally decided the rope was decorative and stepped right over it. The documentary didn't arrive with sirens or headlines screaming confessions. It slipped out calmly, almost politely. That's what made it dangerous. No accusations shouted. No names dragged through the mud outright. Just context, timelines, relationships placed next to each other long enough for viewers to feel uncomfortable. And discomfort in this industry is louder than any allegation, because the moment people realized the story was brushing up against Diddy and Jay-Z, the temperature changed instantly, not curiosity, caution. The kind of pause that says, we're not supposed to talk about this part. Screenshots started circulating, clips got paused and replayed. Not to hear what was said, but to analyze what was left unsaid. And that's where the tension lived. Not in explosive claims, but in implication. The documentary didn't accuse it arranged. It placed moments side by side that had never been viewed together. It revisited old narratives without the usual nostalgia filter. Suddenly, things that once felt normal looked crowded, overlapping, too convenient. Viewers noticed the framing immediately. Scenes that used to pass as industry routine were now given space to breathe, and breathing room exposes details. Who was always there? Who always benefited? Who never seemed to answer questions directly? This wasn't new information.
It was old information reorganized.
And reorganization can feel like revelation. Reaction channels clocked in fast. Some praised the restraint, arguing that the documentary trusted the audience to connect dots without being spoon-fed conclusions. Others accused it of being calculated, of lighting a match and walking away before the fire got blamed on the filmmaker. Both takes went viral. Because ambiguity feeds engagement better than certainty ever could. Memes followed, but they were nervous. Not the loud, playful kind, quieter jokes with sharp edges. The kind that laugh while checking over their shoulder. People compared the vibe to a true crime episode that never names the suspect, but somehow makes everyone sweat. Someone joked, this made scripted drama look lazy. Another said it felt like a history lesson the syllabus skipped. What really set the internet buzzing was how familiar the discomfort felt. None of this came out of nowhere. These weren't brand new suspicions. They were long-standing whispers suddenly given a microphone. The documentary didn't invent the rumors, it acknowledged their existence by refusing to edit around them. Supporters argued this was overdue, that the culture has a habit of protecting power by drowning out questions until they sound inappropriate to ask. Critics fired back that implication without proof is irresponsible, especially when reputations are involved. The debate wasn't about facts anymore. It was about permission. Who gets to ask uncomfortable questions, and who decides which topics are off limits. Then came the silence from the people everyone expected to respond. No statements, no clarifications. No, that's false, or here's context. And silence, in moments like this, is read as strategy. Fans interpreted it as confidence. Skeptics called it containment. Everyone else saw it as proof the documentary hit close to something sensitive. Old interviews resurfaced. Lyrics were re-examined. Party photos from years ago got studied like archaeological finds. Not because they proved anything, but because the audience was already primed to look. Once attention shifts, the past stops being static. It becomes evidence, even when it isn't meant to be. Creators began threading timelines with the caution of people walking across thin ice. Lots of allegedly. Lots of I'm just asking questions. Nobody wanted to cross the line, but nobody wanted to miss the moment either. The result was a chorus of half-statements that collectively sounded louder than a single accusation ever could. The public split cleanly. One side celebrated the disruption, saying powerful figures have enjoyed immunity for too long. The other side warned that rumor-driven narratives destroy legacies without accountability. Both sides accused the other of bad faith. Comment sections turned into ethics seminars hosted by people with Wi-Fi and no chill. What made this phase especially volatile was how it reactivated old discomforts rather than introducing new ones. People weren't shocked because they learned something new. They were unsettled because the documentary validated feelings they'd had for years but never articulated. That kind of validation doesn't calm audiences, it energizes them. As days passed, the conversation widened. This stopped being about one documentary and became a referendum on the industry itself. How stories are curated, how silence is rewarded, how certain narratives get framed as untouchable until someone reframes them as history instead of rumor. Every indirect quote, every vague social post, every refusal to engage added fuel. The story didn't need confirmation to survive. It fed on implication, memory, and the audience's appetite for unfinished business. And here's the uncomfortable truth no one likes admitting. Even if nothing new was proven, something shifted. The idea that certain conversations are forbidden cracked just enough to let light in. Once that happens, the ground never fully resets. By the time attention tried to drift, the narrative had embedded itself. This wasn't a one-week cycle. It was a pressure change. The kind that doesn't announce itself but makes everyone adjust how they breathe. Because silence, once broken even indirectly, doesn't reseal, it echoes. And if this documentary was only the opening move, the next phase wouldn't arrive with noise. It would arrive with consequences, recalculations, and a lot of people suddenly very careful about what they say next. Once the documentary settled into the bloodstream of the timeline, the conversation didn't cool, it crystallized. What had been uneasy curiosity hardened into positions. People picked sides not because new facts dropped, but because the vibe demanded loyalty. The internet doesn't wait for clarity. It waits for momentum. And this story had it. Reaction channels flipped from interesting watch to we need to talk. Some praised the restraint, arguing the film trusted viewers to connect dots without shoving a conclusion down their throats. Others accused it of being surgical, of implying just enough to cause damage without carrying the burden of proof. Both takes trended, because outrage loves ambiguity. It can stretch it forever. Memes arrived with a nervous laugh. Not goofy and easy. The kind that joke while checking the exits. People compared the rollout to a true crime cold open that never names the suspect, but somehow makes everyone sweat. Others joked it felt like a syllabus update to a history class that skipped chapters on purpose. The Kardashians could never manufacture suspense this quietly. Then the celebrity reactions, or lack of them, became the story. Silence read like strategy. Any post that didn't address the documentary was treated as an address. Any quote from years ago was recycled as commentary. The internet doesn't need responses when it has memory. And memory had been activated. Names everyone recognizes hovered over the conversation. Diddy and Jay-Z weren't accused outright in the film, but they didn't need to be. The discussion. LIVD in proximity, in associations. In rooms and relationships the culture already knew about but rarely examined at this angle. Supporters of the documentary framed it as overdue context. They argued that power survives by normalizing discomfort. Until questioning it feels rude. Critics warned that implication without evidence invites mob logic. The debate wasn't about what was true. It was about what should be allowed to be asked. That's always the more explosive argument. Thread after thread mapped timelines. Not declaring guilt, just asking questions. That phrase did a lot of heavy lifting. Creators stacked clips, interviews, and photos like mood boards for suspicion. Nothing definitive. Everything suggestive. Allegedly, repeatedly, carefully. Because nobody wanted to cross the line, but everyone wanted to stand right next to it. As the conversation ballooned. It stopped being about the documentary and started being about the industry's immune system. How it absorbs shocks.
How it
Closes ranks. How it waits out storms. Commentators debated whether this moment would force transparency or simply teach everyone to be quieter. The algorithm rewarded escalation. Videos questioning the documentary's intent performed just as well as videos praising its bravery. Calm takes sank, conflict floated. The incentives were clear, and creators followed them like a drumbeat. Then came the pop culture analogies, always a sign the story has legs. People compared the rollout to a season premiere where the villain isn't revealed, but the tone tells you everything. Others said it felt like a chess move, not a checkmate positioning pieces rather than flipping the board. The metaphors multiplied because certainty was scarce. What made this phase volatile was how it reopened old wounds. Not fresh accusations, old discomforts. Moments people remember feeling off, but never articulated. The documentary didn't invent suspicion. It legitimized remembering it. That's powerful. And dangerous. Silence from expected responders didn't calm anything. It amplified it. Fans interpreted quiet as confidence. Skeptics saw it as containment. Everyone else saw it as proof the film touched something sensitive. In internet logic, if nothing's wrong, someone would say something. If no one says anything, something must be wrong. Creators began hedging harder. More disclaimers. Longer. Intros about fairness and responsibility. But the body of the content still leaned into speculation, because that's where attention lived. Allegedly became a shield, not a break. As days passed, the discourse widened again. This wasn't about three names anymore. It was about how stories get buried and who benefits from the burial. About how proximity to power can feel protective until it feels complicit. Those are big ideas, and big ideas keep people watching. Fans split along familiar lines. One side cheered the disruption, saying the culture needs daylight. The other warned of reputational arson dressed up as inquiry. Both accused the other of bad faith. The comment sections turned into ethics panels moderated by the algorithm. Meanwhile, 50 Cent became a symbol rather than a speaker to supporters. He was the disruptor, finally saying the quiet part out loud without actually saying it. To critics, he was the provocateur lighting a fuse and letting the crowd argue over the blast radius. Either way, the focus shifted from content to consequence. Every indirect quote, every vague post, every non-answer became material. The internet doesn't require confirmation to sustain a narrative. It requires tension. And tension was everywhere. What settled in was a low, constant hum. Not explosive outrage, sustained scrutiny. The kind that doesn't trend every hour but never disappears. A background process running behind every related headline. People began asking the meta question, what happens next? Does the industry respond with transparency or with silence sharpened into policy? Does this moment change behavior or just teach everyone to speak in even safer riddles? By the time attention threatened to drift, the story had already embedded itself. This wasn't a spike, it was a shift. The documentary didn't need to prove anything to change the weather. It just needed to rearrange the clouds. And when the weather changes, everyone checks their footing. Collaboration slow, words get weighed, rooms get quieter. Not because something was proven, but because something became discussable. That's the escalation, not sirens, not statements. A recalibration. The sense that the ground moved a few inches under everyone's feet. When the noise finally dipped, it didn't leave silence behind, it left a recalibration. The kind that doesn't trend, but changes how rooms feel. Allegedly, the documentary stopped being watched and started being remembered. And memory, once activated, rearranges priorities quietly. Supporters frame the moment as overdue daylight. They argued that nothing new needed to be proven for something important to have happened. The shift, they said, was cultural. Questions that once felt impolite suddenly felt permissible. Critics countered that implication without proof corrodes trust, that reputations aren't collateral for curiosity. Both sides claimed responsibility. Neither side backed down. At the center of the gravity, Wells sat 50 Cent, less a narrator now than a symbol. To one camp, he was the disruptor who refused to keep pretending the velvet rope was sacred. To the other, he was the instigator who rearranged old rumors into a new shape and walked away while the crowd argued. The documentary didn't need his voice anymore. It had momentum. Names everyone recognizes remained unavoidable. Diddy and Jay-Z weren't accused outright in the film, yet they hovered over every discussion. Proximity did the work. Association did the talking. In the court of public perception, distance is evidence and silence is strategy depending on who's telling the story. Behind the scenes, the consequences allegedly arrived in ways that never make headlines. Meetings cooled. Collaborations slowed. Invites softened. Not cancellations, calculations. When uncertainty enters a room, people don't argue about it. They step back from it. Risk assessment doesn't announce itself, but it changes calendars. The industry's reflex kicked in, not defense containment. Words got vaguer, statements got shorter. Some conversations moved offline entirely. Others didn't happen at all. The lesson wasn't say more, it was say less better. When a topic becomes discussable, the first response isn't transparency, it's insulation. Audiences felt the change too. Comment sections thinned, but the takes grew longer. Less laughter, more paragraphs. The thrill of the reveal gave way to something heavier, accountability fatigue. People weren't chasing a verdict anymore. They were wrestling with implications. That's when a story stops being viral and starts being structural. Attempts to redirect attention worked briefly. New music dropped. New drama tried to elbow its way in. But the reference point stuck. Every unrelated headline got measured against the same question. Who decides what's off limits? That question doesn't fade. It ELOCATES. Critics insisted. The outrage would pass like it always does. Supporters said this felt different. Both were right. Attention drifts. Memory files away. The next time power, proximity, and silence intersect, this moment will be recalled, not quoted, not linked, but felt. What unsettled people most wasn't what the documentary claimed, it was what it normalized. The act of arranging old information into a new context, the refusal to avert the camera, the suggestion that history doesn't need fresh allegations to deserve scrutiny. That idea alone changes behavior. Creators adapted in real time. More disclaimers, longer caveats. Just asking questions became a genre, allegedly turned into armor. The line between inquiry and insinuation got thinner, not thicker. The culture didn't slow down, it learned to tiptoe louder. Silence from expected responders remained. To some, that silence looked like confidence. To others, like avoidance. The ambiguity fueled both interpretations at once, which is exactly how sustained narratives survive. A clean denial might have closed a door. Quiet left it ajar. As weeks passed, the documentary's specifics mattered less than its effect. It had shifted the weather. People watched what they said. Listened for what wasn't said, not paranoia, prudence. When the ground moves an inch, everyone adjusts their stance. There was no neat ending because neat endings require agreement. What emerged instead was a stalemate. Suspicion without proof, defense without statements, and a public trained to read between lines that may or may not exist. Humans crave conclusions. When they don't get them, they extract lessons. One lesson. Landed hardest, control is fragile. You can manage optics, curate narratives, and keep the velvet rope tight, but context is a solvent. Rearranged long enough, It dissolves certainty. Another lesson cut closer to the audience. Implication is powerful. It doesn't need receipts to influence behavior. It just needs attention, repetition, and time. That realization unsettled people who prefer clear villains and tidy truths. Nothing about this felt finished. No apology tour, no triumphant rebuttal. Just a pause filled with recalculation. The kind that precedes either reform or retrenchment. The industry will choose one not publicly, but practically. If the documentary was the spark, the fire won't be loud. It will be controlled burns, quieter rooms, fewer overlaps, safer language. The cost of being misunderstood went up. The cost of saying nothing stayed the same. And that's the paradox this moment leaves behind. Silence can protect you, but it can also define you. Break it and you multiply questions. Keep it and you let others narrate. There's no option that restores the old normal once the conversation becomes permissible. So the story doesn't end with a reveal. It ends with a shift. A culture that learned how easily old shelves can be rearranged, and how quickly the dust becomes visible, which means the next chapter won't announce itself with a trailer. It will arrive as distance, as caution, as a room that goes quiet when certain topics come up. And everyone will pretend not to notice why. If you stayed all the way through this breakdown. Congratulations, you just watched silence get louder. Then statements and implication do more damage than a press conference ever could. No courtroom, no verdict. Just a documentary, a pause, and an industry suddenly walking on eggshells it pretended weren't there. Now I want your take. Did this documentary actually expose anything new, or did it do something more dangerous? Force people to look at what's been sitting in plain sight the whole time? Is this accountability finally knocking, or just another round of internet speculation dressed up as asking questions? Drop your opinion in the comments, because this conversation is way bigger than one film. And the comment section is where the real pressure always builds. If this video made you stop, rewind, or side-eye your screen like, nah. Wait a second. Do me a favor and smash that like button like it's been lying to you for years. It helps the channel, feeds the algorithm monsters, and tells YouTube you want stories that don't tiptoe around uncomfortable topics. And if you're not subscribed yet, fix that immediately. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because moments like this don't come with warning labels, and when the next industry shift happens, you'll want the breakdown before the timeline decides what you're supposed to think. This channel. Lives where power meets pressure, where silence gets dissected, and where celebrity narratives don't get a free pass just because they're familiar. No fluff, no fake outrage. Just context, patterns, and the questions people pretend not to. Here, because once the blueprint cracks, everything built on it has to adjust. Welcome to Fame Blueprint.